At the edge of human ambition lies an abyss of ice and silence, vast, unyielding, and eternal. In 1845, two stout wooden ships, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, slipped quietly into the frozen labyrinth of the Canadian Arctic. Aboard them sailed Sir John Franklin and 128 other souls, driven by empire, by science, and by the haunting promise of the Northwest Passage. When they set sail, they were greeted as heroes. But within months, hope began to fracture, creaking just like their reinforced hulls, fighting crushing sheets of ice. Over the next 3 years, every triumph was swallowed by the Arctic. Every step forward echoed with the crack of lifetime dreams breaking apart. By summer 1848, all would be lost, buried in snow, in silence, on bones. This is the raw truth of Franklin's lost expedition. On May 19, 1845, the two ships cast off from Greenhithe, England. Franklin, a seasoned Arctic explorer aged 59, commanded the Erebus. Captain Francis Crozier helmed the Terror. Between them, they carried 129 men, officers, sailors, marines, plus coal-fired steam engines to help them push through ice, and a 3-year supply of food, stored in tins sealed with lead solder. Though innovative, these tins would later carry unseen danger. The ships paused at Stromness in the Orkneys on May 31st to resupply and offload 5 sick men. They spent 30 days reaching Disco Bay, Greenland, where fresh meat was taken aboard. Then, late July, they ventured into Lancaster Sound, last seen by whalers around July 26th, drifting into the Arctic's white embrace and vanishing from European sight forever. As autumn descended, the men sought winter refuge in Wellington Channel. By winter 1845 to 46, Erebus and Terror oversaw camp at Beechey Island, a small speck framed by ice. Initially hopeful, they found footing, but by January 1846, the expedition's first deaths struck. John Torrington, January 1st. John Hartnell, January 4th. William Brain, April 3rd. Buried in April 8th. Buried on Beechey, their graves marked the expedition's first taste of mortality. Conditions worsened, scurvy, pneumonia, tuberculosis, already afflicting some, spread. The tinned food, thought immune to spoilage, may have been compromised. In the years that followed, modern analysis showed low zinc, not lead, likely triggered weakened immunity. Isolation began to weave its spell. Frozen landscapes, endless white. Inside, men retreated into repetitive tasks, daily stands at the wheel, counting lifeboat drills. Conversation turned to home. Some wrote letters to loved ones that would never be sent. Through it all, the ships shuddered against thickening sea ice. Their strength, a fragile hope. When spring came, Franklin's men believed they could break free. They sailed Peel Sound during the 1846 melt. For a few haunting weeks, the ice cracked and groaned, threatening to swallow them. Then in September 1846, both vessels were trapped in Victoria Strait, south of King William Island. What began as a drift soon turned into an ice tomb. For 2 winters, 1846 to 47 and 1847 to 48, they remained locked, adrift and immobile. Without traction, their once hopeful drift became a drifting doom, as pack ice pressed around them like iron jaws. The silence of winter was broken by cracks and groans in the hull, muffled shouts inside, and the first flicker of candlelight in the long Arctic night. Franklin fell ill, perhaps from scurvy or tuberculosis. By June 11th, 1847, he was gone. Left leaderless, Crozier, then Fitzjames, assumed command. The frozen fortress seemed impenetrable. Cairns were built, compassion dimmed, the spectre of hunger crept close. On May 28, 1847, a six-man sledge party deposited a note at Victory Point, signed by James Fitzjames and Charles Gore. All well. But this facade cracked on April 25, 1848, when a postscript was added in cramped margins. Franklin had died June 11, 1847. 9 officers and 15 men were dead. And on April 26, 1848, the remaining 105 survivors would abandon the ships for a final, horrific trek toward the Back River. This note, cold, clinical, desperate, was the final testament. It was found in May 1859 by McClintock's search team, 12 years after it was left, iced and unread for a dozen years. April 26, 1848. 105 men staggered off the Erebus and Terror, leaving behind their wooden wombs frozen fast in Victoria Strait. They set out hauling heavy sledges piled high with supplies, food, muskets, boats, even silverware. Their destination was the Back River, over 250 miles of ice and snow away. If they could reach it, they might find a fur trading post or rescue. But even from the start, the odds were brutal. The men dragged over 700 pounds per sledge across treacherous sea ice. Many were already weakened from scurvy and malnutrition. Inuit oral histories describe them as ghostly figures, faces sunken, skin blackened by frostbite, moving like shadows across the blinding white wastes. As they trudged south, men began to fall. Some collapsed in their tracks, their bodies too heavy to carry. Others froze silently, still clinging to hope. A boat found later on a sledge near Starvation Cove contained 2 skeletons. One lay face down, his skull cracked. The other curled in the fetal position, as if sleep had overtaken him mid-march. But the most haunting detail came from cut marks found on some of the bones, signs of butchery. They suggested that the starving men had resorted to cannibalism. In the words of searcher John Ray, the men had been driven to the last dread alternative as a means of prolonging existence. Modern forensic studies confirmed Ray's grim reports. Bones bore unmistakable cut marks, sawed and broken to extract marrow. Some skulls were smashed in, possibly for brain tissue. Even the expedition's officers weren't spared. DNA testing in 2021 identified one such victim, James Fitzjames, his jawbone showing signs of post-mortem cutting. Inuit hunters described seeing men wandering the ice in small groups, some dragging sledges, others clutching weapons. They told of white men pitching tents, trying to hunt seals, but too frail to succeed. One story spoke of a party found in a tent, all dead, and some had been eating the flesh of others. The Inuit also reported finding a ship trapped in ice, its decks empty, sails tattered. They scavenged utensils, wood and cloth, keeping the memory of the ghost ships alive long after the expedition's final members fell. By the time the survivors reached King William Island's southern shores, starvation and disease had claimed most. Those few who made it to the mainland, Starvation Cove, succumbed soon after. They were within a tantalizing 30 miles of possible rescue, yet utterly cut off. When Franklin failed to return after 3 years, Britain launched dozens of search missions. Lady Franklin, unwilling to accept her husband's fate, poured her fortune into finding answers. In 1854, Dr. John Ray, working for the Hudson's Bay Company, became the first to learn their true fate from Inuit witnesses. But his report of cannibalism outraged Victorian society. Charles Dickens, among others, decried it as slander against English seamen. Yet Ray's physical evidence, silverware, boots and clothing from officers, proved his account wasn't fantasy. In 1859, Francis McClintock discovered the Victory Point note, alongside relics like books, Bibles, and a boat on a sledge packed with skeletons. These finds painted a picture of desperation and hopelessness. For decades, Franklin's expedition became a legend of noble sacrifice, its darker truths suppressed. Paintings and stories portrayed Franklin as a heroic martyr. Yet whispered accounts of men eating leather, dogs, and finally each other haunted Arctic lore. Inuit stories, passed down orally for generations, spoke of ships alive with spirits drifting silently across the ice. In 2014, Parks Canada made a stunning discovery: the wreck of HMS Erebus in Queen Maud Gulf. 2 years later, HMS Terror was found upright in Terror Bay, her decks eerily intact, cabins frozen in time. Both ships had shifted south from their last known positions, perhaps sailed by desperate survivors or carried by shifting ice. Explorers found preserved artifacts, plates, boots, charts, and even human remains. One cabin held a desk with open papers, as if the officer had simply stepped away. The galley contained sealed tins of food. Some skeletal remains bore traces of disease and malnutrition, consistent with scurvy and lead poisoning. Forensic evidence confirmed the horrors. Lead toxicity likely weakened immune systems. Scurvy ravaged gums and joints. Hypothermia claimed those too slow to march. Cannibalism offered a fleeting chance at survival. Even the captains suffered. Crozier and Fitzjames probably led the final march. Crozier's fate remains unknown. His body was never found. Inuit testimony hints he may have survived longer than most, seen leading a small party weeks after others fell. What drove these men into such depths of suffering? Hubris, empire, or a belief that the Arctic could be tamed by steel and will alone? Today, the wrecks rest beneath warming Arctic seas, watched by curious narwhals, guarded by drifting ice. They are no longer simply ghost ships. They are memorials. Memorials to men who pursued glory and found oblivion. Perhaps it was never just about finding the Northwest Passage. Perhaps Franklin's men, staring into endless white, came to understand too late. Some frontiers are not meant to be conquered. And yet, their bones still speak. From the quiet Arctic seabed to the cold museums of London, they whisper a question into our age. What will we risk and what will we lose in our own quests for glory?